of the Ramaytush Ohlone community and by affirming their sovereign rights as First Peoples. We have also developed an ancestral acknowledgement. This acknowledgement was created on behalf of the San Francisco African American Reparations Advisory Committee. It is read before each committee meeting to honor our Black ancestors, including Mary Ellen Pleasant, who financed John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, and William Leadsdorf, who was one of the pioneering leaders of San Francisco, both in the mid-1800s. So we have been here a long time. We honor the gifts, resilience, and sacrifices of our Black ancestors, particularly those who toiled the land and built the institutions that established this city's wealth and freedom, despite never being compensated nor fully realizing their own sovereignty. We acknowledge this exploitation of not only labor, but of our humanity. And through this process, are working to repair some of the harms done by public and private actors. Because of their work, we are here and will invest in the descendants of their legacy. I'm very proud to be here in San Francisco. My first job was in 1977 for the Mayor's Summer Youth Program under Mayor Moscone. And we were almost 14% of the population. Today, we're less than 6%. What does that mean? Who are we? What are we doing? To address some of these issues, the Human Rights Commission, under the leadership of our next speaker, Dr. Cheryl Evans Davis. We have made great strides, including in 2020, passing unanimously that anti-Black racism is a public health and human rights crisis here in the city and county of San Francisco. Dr. Davis is an extraordinary change maker, change leader, community organizer, and she's been our executive director since 2016. She's a passionate advocate for community outreach, involvement, input, and feedback. And sometimes that feedback is the prettiest. But she is always beautiful through it all, inside and out. She oversees the Equity Studies Task Force, the Blue Ribbon Panel for Juvenile Justice Reform, and the Dreamkeeper Initiative, among many other programs that we have here at the San Francisco Human Rights Commission. She also worked to build out an equity framework with San Francisco community stakeholders and city departments, resulting in the Office of Racial Equity. Without further ado, Dr. Cheryl Evans Davis. Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, that was so nice. Usually in the morning like this, it takes a few times for folks to get it right. So, but it sounded so good. I want to hear it again. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you all so much for coming out on a rainy Good Friday, if that is of your faith, afternoon, morning, and day to spend some time with us.
I've said this before and I want to say it again publicly, like one of the smartest things you can do is surround yourself with brilliant, creative, wonderful people. And so I want to make sure before I get too far gone to recognize and acknowledge Brittany Chiquata, the Director of Economic Rights for the UDSC. Without a doubt, I would say we've got some of the smartest, fiercest women as a part of the Human Rights Commission, from our chair down to Dr. Sy to Brittany. Brittany is by far one of the smartest people I know. So I want to thank her for her vision and her work and her agreeing to be the director of this division of the Human Rights Commission. So give another round for when I was thinking about what I wanted to say this morning, some of you know and have heard the story that I started my career actually as a kindergarten teacher. And so often I think of things in very simple, simplistic terms. And I was thinking on my way here about one poem from this amazing author that I never got the chance to meet, but wish I could have, Eloise Greenfield. And she had one poem that I think about that I think to me epitomizes why we want to have this conversation and why we need to have this conversation. It starts and it says, walked to the corner, went to the store, bought me some candy, ain't got it no more, ain't got it no more. Went to the beach, laid on the shore, built me a sandcastle, ain't got it no more, ain't got it no more. Went to the kitchen, laid on the floor, wrote me a poem, still got it, still got it. Economic rights is about all of those things. It is about the ability to go to the store and buy what it is that you want and not worry about how much it costs and not worry about it having it gone and being away from you. It is about having the ability to have rest and leisure and to go to the shore, to play, to have the freedom to play and to relax and to just be, to build a sandcastle and know that it might go away, but that you took joy in the process of creating and being. But more than anything, it is about having the ability to have a kitchen floor, to have a place to go, to have the supplies and materials to just actually just write and think and be creative. That's what economic rights is about. And unfortunately, there are too many people that do not have the leisure, the rest, the ability to just go to the shore and just watch the sand roll in and out through the waves. There are too many people that can't go to the store and buy a piece of candy. It was 5 cents when I was a kid, then 25 cents, and now I think it's over $1, right? That can't just say, I want to buy some candy. And that there are too many people that do not have their own kitchen floor that they can just lay down and write a poem. And so as we go through this process, what we have seen, unfortunately, in San Francisco is that within the Black community, as other folks have not only had their booms, but as they've seen an increase, in San Francisco, the Black population is the only one to steadily decrease. And that has stayed constant in being in the lower percentile, unfortunately, of everything, whether that's academics, whether that's housing, whether that's wealth. And so when we have this conversation today, it's about understanding how everyone has not had equal access to the ability to prosper and thrive in San Francisco, to learn the lessons from the past, but also think about how we move forward. So we have some amazing people to participate in that conversation. I mentioned earlier around Brittany Chiquata, so she will help moderate and facilitate and participate in this conversation of poverty as a tool of oppression against Black women. Brittany Chiquata, her serves as Director of Economic Rights at the San Francisco Human Rights Commission. In this capacity, she focuses on policy and programs to eliminate wealth, apartheid, equity, and uplift economic opportunities to improve quality of life for the most marginalized in San Francisco. Brittany has worked as a policymaker over the last decade, co-writing and co-leading successful campaigns with tangible impact locally and nationally. The ancestral land acknowledgement that you saw, Brittany helped create and craft and actually wrote that. She also was the lead writer for the resolution from the commission around anti-Blackness as a public health issue. So Brittany is, as I mentioned, brilliant and creative. Brittany is focused on helping realize the social and health needs of the most vulnerable communities and currently does that by expanding the work of government in radical investments towards a more equitable society. So give Brittany a round as she comes to the stage. We also have Dr. Julian Malvo is an American economist, author, social and political commentator, and I will just want to throw in there, speaker of truth, and unabashedly and unapologetically speaks that. So if you're not ready for that, I would say go to the bathroom right now, because she's getting ready to take you on a ride that you will not forget. She is a commentator and dean of the New College of Ethnic Studies at CSU Los Angeles. As a writer and syndicated columnist, her work has appeared regularly in USA Today, Black Issues in Higher Education, Ms. Magazine, Essence Magazine, and The Progressive, and that is just a small snapshot of the greatness of Dr. Julian Malvo. Please give her a round. And our next panelist I've had the pleasure of watching and learning from, and always have desired for the opportunity to work with Ann Price, who is amazing, and I've used this word a lot, but it is so true, brilliant and genius. Ann Price is the co-founder of Maven Collaborative, an organization centering race, gender, and joy in the pursuit of economic justice. Previously the first woman president of the Insight Center for Community Economic Development, Ann was one of the first national thought leaders to examine and push for narrative change in addressing race, gender, and wealth inequality, and I think is an example for all of us of how to fight for economic justice and use the lens of joy, but also in the pursuit for economic justice, fighting for yourself and for those that come behind you. So thank you so much, Ann, as you join the stage for the work that you've done.
Thank you, Director Davis. I feel like I needed like Beyonce and a windblower with that intro. Who is recording? So I can, my next review. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We're really excited for this conversation with two beautiful, brilliant, amazing leaders that I am just really honored to be in company with and have admired from afar for a while, cyberstalked. But life brought us together in different spaces, so I'm happy to be in this space with you this morning. As Director Davis was saying, today is really not only meant to be a conversation with each of you and with one another about the different topics throughout the day, but it's really intended to spark something in you to do something about the BS that you're about to hear, right? I know a lot of times we go over statistics and it's just, oh, shaking my head. Oh, But what are you doing? Like, other than getting ready to go to happy hour, like, what are you actually doing to be uncomfortable, to make your neighbor uncomfortable, or your colleague uncomfortable, or your bosses uncomfortable, to really shift these environments that we're all participating in one way or another, right? Because as I understand it, neutrality in the face of oppression is choosing the side of the oppressor. So if you're walking through your days in silence and neutrality because you don't want to make other people uncomfortable or because you're not trying to jeopardize your salary, then are you really like executing the work that you're intending to execute? Are you really helping the folks that you're intending to help and reach? Or are you just trying to be a gatekeeper to your own ends? And I think that a lot of times, particularly for women, particularly for Black women or women of color, we get content with a little bit. We get a little scared, we get a little tight about saying things in spaces where it took a lot to get there, admittedly, right? It was hard, it hurt. Nobody helped me. Nobody lifted my hand up, so why should I help you? And that we really have to kind of disabuse ourselves of if we're all gonna win, right? Because without like that collective work and collective action, then we're just perpetuating and reproducing the same oppressions, just, you know, with a different face. And that's my feeling. So I hope everybody feels a little bit of rage throughout the day, but also inspired to action, inspired to talking to somebody that you don't know, connecting with somebody, but also like looking in your small spaces, whether that's your community, your neighborhood, your job, but also at the city, because a lot of our work, as a hand of the man, is about, being one of those fighters on the inside to try and change in collaboration with community, those things that we know and have experienced to be wrong. So, with that said, I want to ask you both a light question. What compels you to unflinchingly center Black women in your work?
I am a Black woman. That's what compels me. As an economist, all too often, we're overlooked in terms of the data. Or I worked for Jimmy Carter a bazillion years ago, the Council of Economic Advisors. The economic report of the president comes out annually. And they never had, first of all, they had Blacks and others. And so I would say almost single-handedly, because I raised high holy hell, those of you who know me know that I'm pretty good at that. So I'm like, y'all got to change this. And I, at the time, was a PhD student. I didn't have my degree yet. I was from MIT. And Charlie Schultz, who was a great guy, he was like, who is this person demanding that something be changed when she just got here? And the answer was, I'm Julianne Melvin. And that's really all you need to know. But basically, my work has caused me to center my doctoral dissertation was on unemployment differentials by race and occupation. And that's how I learned about occupational segregation. I already knew, what was going on with Black women, but occupational segregation really talks about women being stuck in certain occupations, but then for Black women, it's even more of that. It's changed a bit. I wrote my dissertation in 1980. In case y'all wondered, I will be 70 this year. I tell you all the time. I wouldn't tell it because I don't look. If I looked at it, I wouldn't tell it. But so
Regimen dropping at the end of this conversation.
But basically, looking at that, I saw the hyper segregation of Black women. You could really look at just the few jobs that Black women held. And so as I play with data, which I love to do, the way that Black women are dealt with in data really drives basically my work. I will say one other quick thing. So-called wokeness has gotten a bad name by the idiots like Mr. DeSaint in Florida and in Texas. I have a dear friend, he does DEI work, Howard Ross, who has a diversity company. White guy, he says, I don't want to hear the word woke anymore because it's not whether you're woke or not, it's what you do when you get out of bed. Right. What Brittany just said about being an activist, I mean, you all have the opportunity with this pervasive anti-Blackness, not just in San Francisco, but increasingly in our nation. You have the opportunity, and I especially am talking to non-Black people, the allies. I mean, because I know too many of what I call the melanin deprived, who will sit and hear stuff and not say stuff. Now, I'm not suggesting that you necessarily.
Or they say something to you in the hallway, which pisses me off more. Girl, I agree with you, Brittany. I was on your team.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why was I the only one talking?
Hello, and so I'm challenging those who are melanin deficient to essentially step up and speak up, because we can't do it. Here in San Francisco, I think that the director of human rights who just spoke said we're less than, or maybe it was Karen, who said we're less than 6%.
Yes.
In terms, and when I was coming up, we were 15%. So we can't do it by ourselves. Anti-Blackness has to be as painful for everybody as it is for Black people. That part.
It's amazing to be next to Dr. Marvel, because when I was an economics major at Hampton, she was one of my sheroes. I mean, she was a trailblazer, and part of it was really her being so outspoken and allowing for others that came behind her to say, we can do that too, right? So I'm just feeling very honored to be on this panel with her.
Thank you.
And continuing great work, because I'm focusing on occupational segregation. it took a long time for me to get to this point in my career to be able to be focused on Black people. And I think it's very interesting as racial equity has almost become a buzzword to the point where we don't really even at this point know what it means. It's used so much. We have racial equity statements. People are saying they're doing it in their work. And you can actually say you're doing racial equity and be profoundly anti-Black at the same time. And so, it was just a few years ago that I was told, people called me and said, I don't want you to talk about race. Why are you talking about race? Now, mind you, I was working on the racial wealth gap. But for many, many years, I fought in the nonprofit and government sector to really focus on race and disaggregate race. And that was met with a great deal of marginalization. It's just recently that we can have even some of the conversations that we're having today. So I just think we have to think about some of this as being still very new. And so in that, I think there is a real push now to group folks together. And there's a discomfort. There's a discomfort with Blackness. Even when you say it in a meeting, people start to get uncomfortable. And when you say, in our work, we say we're centering Black women, the first thing we hear is, well, what about other people? Right. Now, I just think when you look at other groups, other marginalized communities, are those questions asked to them? Are they asked to Indigenous Native people? Are they asked for folks? I only see this truly happening with Black people. And so then you have to start to explain yourself, right? There's also something very deeply, I can say that when I was doing work way back when on welfare reform, and I said, I was working at a national organization and said, if we are not paying attention to Black women in Mississippi, they are our center. And they said, girl, sit down, right? You're crazy, right? They were in this whole analytical framework around what was going to happen. But, in this work, oftentimes, when we choose to do this work, we can be very much marginalized. And we can be punished. There are many times over my career, I've been punished for speaking about Blackness. And now I'm at a point recently, just starting my own entity, after 30 years of work, where I can say unapologetically, we're centering the needs of Black women. And getting some funding behind it, right? So I'm in a nonprofit. A lot of funders say, well, okay, that's great, but what about other people, right? And not understanding centering doesn't mean excluding, right? Centering does not mean excluding. And so
what does centering mean?
I really see this as when we take and look at the experience of Black women and the intersections of class and of gender identity and of family, it tells us a story of what's truly possible in America. I truly believe that. I believe that it can help uplift other folks, right? Because we tend to forget about the needs of Black women. It's not disaggregated. And I'm not saying that there's no relationship between Black men and Black women. Certainly there is. But as you just mentioned, when you look at something like occupational segregation, no other group is more effective than Black women. No other group, right? When you look at who is really pushed into the dirtiest, most dangerous jobs, it is Black women. It is Black women as home health aides, right? And so forth, right? So when we gloss over that, we're missing something so essential that can help every group. Think about domestic workers. Who were the first domestic workers? That's right. Let's think about domestic work. Let's think about our grandmothers and great-grandmothers who were domestic workers. And now we see a lot of immigrant women, a lot of Latinx women who are domestic workers. And so all the ways in which we think about domestic work is grounded in Blackness, right? We have to understand that Blackness will really addressing anti-Blackness will set us all free, right? It will set us all free because the systems that we've created, the policies that are in place that are profoundly anti-Black affect everyone ensnared in that policy.
You know, it's interesting when you talk about centering. I think of Paula Giddings. When and where I enter, my race and my gender come with me. And that's why we center on Black women. When you look at Black women, you're really looking at everyone else, at what affects everyone else, including men. I'm reading this book. Well, I just finished it actually while I was stuck at the airport. That's another story. But it's called Benjamin Banneker and Us. It's written by a white woman who found out that she was related to Benjamin Banneker. It's a fascinating book. I don't like to have it that much, but it's a fascinating book. Because she chooses to try to make her white self the portal to Benjamin Banneker. But as part of the story, which she's a good writer, she just on my nerves. But basically, she talks about how the concept of Blackness came. Because there was a point in time which indentured people and Black people were perceived as equal. Both were indentured for a period of 7 to 14 years, depending on what was going on. Most of them were, when they finished their period of indenture, given either some land and some stuff, in some cases as little as a dress, but in some cases, some substantial things. In order to exploit Black people, and especially Black women, because they also changed the terms of enslavement. Before you were enslaved, well, basically your status came from your father. But then when you decide that we were the means of production, then the status came through the mother. And so, exactly. So you couldn't inherit anything. You couldn't basically do anything. And Massa could increase his wealth by raping Black women. And so, because then she would have his child. And the depravity of whiteness, the depravity of it, that you would enslave your own children, that you would sell your own children. I mean, there is a depravity that is literally at the foundation of this nation. And we should never forget that, which is why talking about Black women first is so critically important.
And I love, that is so true. Thank you for that history. I love what you were saying, Anne, about just how it becomes threatening when you walk with pride or affirmation about your Blackness and centering that Blackness. And I know that when we were checking in, I mean, I probably had this conversation with multiple people in this room. We were talking about Angel Reese and just how proud she is and unapologetic she is in her Blackness, and how many coded ways they have called her a monkey, essentially, to dehumanize her. And part of the way oppressive structures win is by perpetuating unfeminine portrayals of Black women and using coded language that possess. So I wanted to jump back to you and to please speak with us about your career of work of shifting narratives from white standards and how we talk about race and gender and wealth inequality. And just like communication as kind of foundational in that, policy advocacy work.
Yeah, but I do have to give Angel Reese some props. I mean, I watched that game and I was just stunned. I was just like, for her to say, I will be my whole self. My entirety. Like that's, I was just so proud, right? Because when can we be our true selves? Certainly you can't think about the policy that affected Black people without thinking about these narratives, these longstanding narratives that have been in play. And certainly the welfare queen narrative is so predominant, right? And it's such a way that if we don't really address narratives about Black people, about Black women, we really can't make that change. We always say that narratives eat policy for breakfast, right? What undergirds our political will are those narratives around deservedness, right? And so about a decade ago, I started to say, look, we need to think about narrative shift. At the time, people thought it's just words, and not realizing that that is a true driver of economic inequities in our country. And at the seat of that are some real damning narratives about Black women and their worth. And we can use those to really, we can to, weaponize them, right, for political gain. When you hear the word, I mean, a politician only has to say scoundrel or cheat. And that imagery, when you think about the national welfare rights movement and what those women did, I mean, these were Black women who came out of sharecropping, who said, I envision a nation that looks very different than it looks today. I envision a nation where children are cared for, where work is not the predominant frame. This was visionary, right? Over 50 years ago. And they fought very hard against those narratives then, back in the 60s, right? They were really trying to counter this narrative as like Black being the symbol of poverty. And, within a few years, that was suddenly shifted and there was just, this imagery, right? So there's imagery behind this. It's not just the words we use. Now we don't even have to use a word. Use an image. We just have to use a word, and it can be one word, cheat. It can be one word. And that imagery of this, Black woman with all these kids comes to mind, and that can be used to cut any benefit program. And it's used all the time, right? And so I really started to say that our work needs to embrace narrative shifts in it. And that means understanding how people's mental models, right? How people actually see the world. And to know that there is deep-seated racial resentment that is not just from conservatives, some of the work that we did, but deeply across every political spectrum, right? That those ideas of almost a culture of poverty, which we thought was a thing of the past, still very much exists. So that work to me is so central in fighting for economic justice, that goes hand in hand with the activism, with the policy work. And the fact that we have to be out front and really say, we're going to confront these narratives at every turn. And I think the biggest challenge is getting people to invest in that, right? Getting people to see that that is a worthwhile thing, to say, well, show me how are you going to prove, what are your outcomes? How are you going to show that that actually is going to make a change? Can you actually mitigate racism under this 2-year grant that I'm going to give you? It's this idea that we have to be investing in the long arc, that we are picking up the torch from past generations, and we know that we take a step forward and we're taking 2 steps back. We are in a period of retrenchment. George Floyd happened and, people got happy. I'm saying this to the people in the nonprofit industrial complex. And now what we're seeing some pulling back on that, right? And we're seeing all sorts of laws coming into play that said you can't teach history. You can't make kids feel that slavery was a bad thing. You can't make them uncomfortable. You can't say slavery was wrong. You can't do racial equity training. And this is not just happening in southern red states, right?
44 states have introduced legislation to prevent the teaching of race.
That's right.
16 or 17 states, I'm not sure the number because it changes, might be up to 18 by now, have passed these laws. Of course, this is where I live. I'm the dean of the College of Ethnic Studies. And so there's literally, I have not ordered, because I'm not supposed to do that, gently or not so gently suggested to faculty that this is your bread and butter, y'all. So y'all would like to want to get organized and to basically start speaking up about this. Because the law that says you can't, the first state that passed a law, I'm getting ready to get agitated, that said you couldn't teach about race was Oklahoma, where they burned down Black Wall Street. And now you're not supposed to make anybody uncomfortable. And I just debated some white boy. I got to stop doing that because I'm too old. I get ready to start having high blood pressure. And so you get that when you get old, unless you're very careful, which I'm not. But this fool, had the temerity to tell me that I was anti-American. Because anti-American. I laid his behind out so bad. The radio host said, well, we're going to have to take a break. I'm like, we did not have breaks scheduled. But by the time I got finished with that boy, it was like, look, un-American. We are the most American people there are. I mean, we jumped this sucker. We didn't get paid for it. And I wrote a book years ago called The Paradox of Loyalty. The subtitle was The African American Response to the War on Terrorism. And we are a paradox because we keep hoping that America will love us like we love it. We keep hoping that somehow our brothers keep going to war. We keep hoping that somehow fighting for this country will make us accept it. And it never has. And so, when we start talking about the law and retrenchment, look, three legislators in Tennessee were there was a vote to expel them. Of course, they expelled the two black folks, and they did not expel the white woman. Although her vote was very narrow, 3 more votes another way, one more, then she would have been expelled also. But literally, these folks want this back, and they're unapologetic about saying it. They just come out and say, we want. These folks, they want to go back to the good old days. When were the good old days? And then the question becomes, good for who? Because they're still looking at, and this is why, and it's so important when we start talking about centering Black women. When they talk about going back to the good old days, their vision of the family was, what was it, Dick and Jane, and I was with the dogs. Peter the Beaver, and there's another one, Dick Van Dyke, and all that stuff. And we first of all, Black women never had that. But secondly, the majority of white women didn't have it either. All that white folks have is the illusion of whiteness. Like Toni Morrison once said that working class whites were just like us, like working class white people, except they had the N-word. And when she said it, I heard her give the lecture, it was really it was almost hilarious because she didn't say the N-word, she said nigger. Like how some folks who can't even speak GD English know what that slur is and know how to use it as a weapon. And so the anti-Blackness is basically seeped into our culture as a weapon against Black people and little children. You see, I don't mind old racists because I feel they gonna die. I mean, we wait long enough, they'll be gone. I mean, the orange man, his days are numbered. He eats poorly. He grabs people in the wrong place. He gonna be gone. Sooner than I hope. What bothers me is young racists. It's when you get a 20-year-old who goes and shoots up a church in South Carolina. When you get that's what worries me is how are these people learning this racism? It's supposed to be dying out. And who are their friends and who calls them on their BS?
Well, that's a myth, right? And to Ann's point, they're completely protected in the perpetuation of learning and exploiting racism as long as, we're on the receiving end, right? But as soon as we want to talk about centering Black women, centering Blackness, the history of this country, then it's a problem because they're uncomfortable. And that coddling of whiteness to our detriment is what's perpetuating that, power, that white power, that hatred, that anti-Blackness. And I think, what's really frightening and insidious is not necessarily the young racists alone, but the Black folks with internalized anti-Blackness, the ones who get a little scared if you talk too loud from the white person, right? Because why are we whispering? Why are we not talking about, what we're all experiencing? You know what I'm saying? And I think, and when you were talking, I was immediately just in my head, and I saw one of our committee members come in, I was thinking about the African American Reparations Advisory Committee and the bold, unapologetic demand and audacity to quantify the harm that's been exacted upon Black San Franciscans, to say, I don't even know if this is the full number, but it's at least $5 million. And for white folks from every part of this country and outside of this country to start sending us hate mail and leaving us voicemails saying, I'll be choking down on this. But basically, like, how provocative it is that Black people would dare to say out loud, this is at least the amount of damage that you have caused by interrupting our wealth opportunities, by targeting our business corridors, by violently displacing us from San Francisco, by pushing us into the margins of this city, and then we built up beautiful neighborhoods, and then you want to come live here and tell me to leave, by taking away all of our Black teachers, by interrupting our education and our academic institutions, by not teaching me who I am in these academic institutions. And we could just go on by taking away our food, you know. All of it is interconnected, right? But I can't talk about it.
See,
I can't name it.
you know, but the issue, the internal anti-Blackness, you cannot swim in muddy water without getting dirty. So when you saw those Black policemen beating on that brother, it's like, well, the blue line is basically stronger than the racial line. And my best friend from high school, Cynthia Barnes, we went to Lowell. They put me out. What can I say? I've been put out of so many places.
It's still our eyes.
Well, her dad was one of the first Black policemen in San Francisco. The level of hazing that he experienced, he was the only Black man in the world that I was ever afraid of. I wasn't afraid of my dad, but I was afraid of Mr. Barnes. He did. I still call him Mr. Barnes. It would take somebody to put a lobotomy in my head to make me call him by his first name. His kids call him by his first name, and they're like, and Aaron, I'm like, who y'all talking about, Mr. Barnes? But feces was left in his locker. People regularly did things like urinate into his locker. Once his gun went missing, which was like, if you're a policeman and your gun goes missing, I mean, you basically in big doo-doo. It made him, I was afraid of him. There's a reason I was afraid of him. It made him a hard man. He'd cuss you out in a minute. Mr. Barnes would come to parties, we'd be in parties, and we'd be slow dragging some brother under a red light. And he would say, I'm looking for my daughters and that Malvo girl. The brother would drop you. I mean, you all up into it, stay in my car. You sit on the floor. But what I learned from Mr. Barnes is what being a police officer does to you. You know, what it does in terms of how you are able to dehumanize other people. So internalized anti-Blackness is like that for some of us. I mean, you really actually have to, if you woke, so-called woke, whatever, if you have to fight your own internal anti-Blackness from the perspective that you went to school in these United States of America. You sat next to the same racists who support the Orange Man. You got the lessons of the names that were called out, Mary Ellen Pleasant, Mr. Liesedorf. We didn't learn that at Lowell High School, supposed to be the best high school in San Francisco, but they never taught us any of that.
Maybe it happened after you left.
I doubt it. I highly doubt it. I mean, we had to, I think we got one little Black Studies class, and we went out. We went out on strike to get that. That was drama. We had a Swahili class, Kiswahili class, and they fixed us. Everybody liked fifth period lunch, because that's what, the cool people went. So they put Kiswahili in fifth period. So then we had to have fourth period, which is where like the nerds had lunch. But we were like, okay, fine. You can give it to us at 8 a.m. We would still learn some Swahili. But basically, when you list all the things, what we always forget to list is the ways that we don't do what some other ethnicities do. We don't have Saturday school, and we don't teach people to be proud of their Blackness. We teach people to be quiet. We teach people to play small. We teach, I don't know how many times I've been called unfeminine. See, I happen to think I'm fine. I've been thinking that for a long time. But folks will tell you, I was mannish. Well, what is mannish? It means that I have a voice and I use it. But we as Black women are often taught to shrink. Don't raise your, the politics of respectability hits Black women harder than anybody else. Because we are, Dr. Hyde, I love Dr. Hyde, she was a mentor. But Dr. Hyde would not be seen outside without them hat and gloves. That was the armor for us. I was the president of Bennett College, another hotbed of respectability, where the young ladies, even when they were striking, would go downtown, when they were sitting in the Woolworths, would go downtown, hats and gloves. Bennett students until the 70s could not wear pants because that was considered unfeminine. And they're all, and the reason though is what Ann spoke to earlier, is the ways that we as Black women are described as masculine, as either we're whores, everybody wants to have sex, that's a GD lie. So then you get the puritanical response, which is, no, we don't want to have sex at all. That's a lie too. But basically, the ways that we are, the hot Venus, basically dehumanize, turn into body parts. And there's just so many ways that Black women are diminished. I mean, Angel Reese, I'm in love with her, but she's not the first. And think about the little girl in Florida. This is about 10 years ago. They dragged her, white policeman dragged her by her braids. Yep. Dragged her by her braids because we are seen as less than feminine. They would never do that to a white woman. We are seen as less than feminine. We are seen as less than, period. And people, including ourselves, have been given permission to diminish Black women. And there has to be a response. And the response has to come, again, from our allies, but in some ways also from our brothers. The misogynoir is a Black man. There are too many Black men who basically choose to diminish us because they're threatened. I was told that by some man who was insignificant. I did go out with him 4 or 5 times. Then he told me I was intimidated. I'm like, but you can't handle it. That's not it. You just can't handle it. But that's what if we are educated, vocal, attractive, we're intimidated. You're lost, brother.
Well, I want to sit here for a second when you were talking about just those intersections around being over-sexualized, but then also not being desirable at the same time. Because I don't know if folks in here know this, but in 1989, you co-founded African American Women for Reproductive Freedom with 16 other folks. And we're talking about Miss Dorothy Heights, we're talking about Shirley Chisholm, Donna Brazile, and a number of others. And so you did that to stand, if you were here in San Francisco, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about, I think it was called San Francisco Black Forum for Solidarity. Was that the, okay. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that too, but you all put out a manifesto essentially in solidarity with Jane Roe from Roe v. Wade, but also really to center and catapult Black women into the center of a conversation that we have always been a part of. And so to your points on just body autonomy, thinking about not only what you were talking about before around that history of legal changes to make it such that you no longer inherited the name and wealth of your father, but the status of your enslaved mother, and essentially sanctioned that rape and that reproductive, violence was sanctioned, but also the experimentation that happened on our body. We were not, Black midwives were targeted. I recently learned this, to come to the US to birth white babies as well as Black babies. We were literally birthing this nation. We were literally building this nation, not just with our physical labor of building monuments, but with keeping people alive. And then you have J. Marion Sims, who is called the godfather of gynecology, who's experimenting on our bodies without anesthesia, even though it was available. And, being ordained as this public figure and historical figure whose greatness was born on our bodies, right?
Greatness was born on our torture.
On our torture, thank you, better said.
Black women were, there would be no gynecology were it not for Black women.
Right.
On one hand, on the other hand, look at the pain, the collective pain that these women had to endure so that other people could have their coochies looked at. Come on now. I mean, and I'm keeping it clean. Very clean. But those were the good old days to me. Marsha Ann Gillespie was actually the writer of the statement. Marsha was the editor, one of the editors of Essence magazine. I was an intern at Essence in 1972, maybe 3, something like that. But anyway, and Susan Taylor was a part of it. But we all, when Marsha wrote it, I remember the first line: "Choice is the essence of freedom." And that's really what, and the statement goes on. But I'll never forget that line because it was such a powerful line. Black men didn't like that too much. Brothers, I mean, there's a whole cadre of men who believe that abortion is genocide. So zip it up, dude. Real simple. But abortion is not genocide. It is choice. It's a possibility. And the worst part of it is the way that reproductive freedom and economic status intersect. Because what we've now seen in these states, and it's not just red states, but these states where it's illegal to cross state lines, doctors will be prosecuted if they give someone an abortion. But crossing state lines is a privilege of the wealthy. If you're in some place, and I'm not gonna pick on Alabama, Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana, however, are the most pitiful states. Let me add Arkansas, are the most pitiful states in terms of the demographics that you will ever see. Ironically, of course, Arkansas has Sarah Huckabee, whatever, as a governor, and one of the first things she did was went anti-choice. One of the other first things she did was anti-CRT, but nobody is teaching CRT in K-12.
They can't even define it.
No, they can't. It just means teaching about race. But we have to, when we start talking about Black women and economics, we do have to talk about choice. And the extent, and first of all, ain't nobody had no 13 kids. Forgive my Ebonics, but ain't nobody had no 13 kids. I remember being on a TV show with Jerry Brown, and he started talking about 13 kids. I said, you got a number called 1-800-13-KIDS? Because I want to know who has 13 kids. I don't think anybody really has 13 kids. They might be stepkids and this and this and this and this, which really does speak to the generosity of spirit of Black women because we take in anybody's kids. Anybody's kids. They ran the children on the street. My mama used to bring home people from, my mom was a social worker in San Francisco for most of her career. And she would bring them people home. I'm traumatized. I'm still traumatized by all the people my mother brought home. Because she would give them my clothes with tags still on them. And so if you come to my closet, either in LA or in DC, you'll see clothes. It's because I'm trying to make up for what happened, for the trauma of my youth. But one of the other things my mom did, Justin told me I should tell the story, so I will. She would bring these people home. And sometimes they stayed with us for a long time in our basement. Sometimes they stayed for a little while. There was this brother, my sister Marianne is around here somewhere. Marianne, where you at? Oh, there she is. Stand up, please. You put on clean clothes so you can stand. If you didn't have on clean clothes, I would ask you to stand. But Mama, remember that guy? He was 6'6", and Mommy brought him home, and his name on his birth certificate was Little Man Johnson. So Brother Man was 6'6", Little Man Johnson. So he walked like this. He walked stooped over. He had owned his name. And what Mom did for him was took him to court and got his name changed. So to LM. So she didn't change his name, but he had the initials. So because I'm thinking, you're 6'6", and you're at a work site, and they call out, Little Man, everybody's gonna dog you out. But at least LM, and Black folks like to name their children initials too. So LM was just slightly better. But she the San Francisco is indelibly part of my soul. Because I came up here because I used to hang out with the Panthers. We used to go the headquarters on Fillmore. We don't have anything on Fillmore anymore. In fact, some people call it what, Baja Pacific Heights?
Lower Pacific Heights.
Yeah.
But what was it like growing up as a little Black girl in San Francisco?
Well, I was always in trouble. Surprise, surprise. But we had a great time. My mother didn't drive. We wore Muni out. We would go to any museum, the Young Museum. We were always there. Japanese tea gardens. We were always there. My mother even though she was very, very black, she also had enormous understanding for everybody else because she was a social worker. So she wanted to make sure that we saw everything that the city had to offer. So literally on a Saturday, we might be anywhere. I grew up in Bernal Heights, and we used to go to the farmer's market and get in so much trouble down there Stealing, no, I didn't say stealing. Liberating peaches. It was a fun time to be in San Francisco.
But what you're saying, I mean, I grew up in San Francisco too. I grew up in the Fillmore, and I hear this oftentimes from my mom's generations, other older generations, that, you know, it feels like when there were more Black people, there was less pressure about being Black. And there was more openness and kind of like interaction with other races and just kind of like exploration around the city.
You know, that's such a good point. My baby sister used to, she was, what did she do by Marianne? She did some Catholic youth organization at St. Kevin's, which was our church. And she was always hanging out with like, see, I'm just a nationalist. I am not a racist. I am racial. So when I come in the room, I can tell you how many white folks up in here, pretty much. I just start looking, where white folks, where Black folks. If I walk into a room that has no Black people in it, I always say, how can y'all have this all white room? Congress has caused me to get put out of places. But I asked Joe Biden when he was vice president, he wants to do this middle class focus. And they invited me to that. I don't even know how I got there. But I was at Bennett, so I was commuting between DC and Greensboro, kind of. And I just happened to be in town, and Josh Bernstein, who now works for, I think, economic policies, I'm not sure. Anyway, he was working with the vice president. So he said, oh, Melville, you should come to this meeting. So I was like, okay. So I put in my little paperwork. You know, you got to put in paperwork to go to the White House. You didn't have to put in no paperwork.
I mean, we don't all know. Everybody ain't able, so.
But anyway, so we're in the meet with Biden, and he's talking about the middle class, and I was like, yo, Brother Biden. I call him Brother Biden when I want something. I was like, Brother Biden, what about the poor people? And you would have thought that somebody had farted in the room. Everybody got quiet, and he said, well, we really want to focus on the middle class. And I said, but the poor people. I said, the middle class gonna be okay. I said, then some poor people. And he said, now tell me who you're with again. I mean, you have gone around the room and everybody, president of a college, that's kind of like all that in the bag of chips. He's like, tell me who you're with again. And then he tried to change the subject. I said, dude, you know, with all due respect, I would like you to answer my question. Well, you know, I have not been invited back. Not been invited. At that meeting, and actually Josh said to me later, he said, no, why? He said, something told me not to invite you. I said, well, you should listen to your small voice. Because then they had a follow-up meeting, and I did not get invited to the follow-up meeting. But that people do not, they want to diminish the role of poverty, and they want to diminish anti-Blackness, and it's supposed to be okay. So how are you going to invite a Black woman economist whose work you know? All you got to do is Google me. 2/3 of the stuff is true. Sometimes people lie on me. But in any case, how are you going to do that and think the word poverty is not going to come up? What are you thinking? What are you possibly thinking? And what they're thinking is that, you know, I am not a happy to be there Negro. There's a whole lot, but there are a whole lot of happy to be there Negroes out there. They're just happy to be there. So they're going to go out and leave and say, I went to the White House. Whatever, you know.
But I think what they're also thinking is kind of what both of you talked about earlier, which is this erasure of a segment of our population and what they contribute to the workforce, and continued exploitation that enables those folks in that room to go to work, whether that's caring for their children or caring for their parents. And doing the things around the house that they don't otherwise want to do because they have a disposable income to pay someone else to do that. And so as we come towards the end, I'm wondering
Well, I just got wound up.
Okay, well, the mic will be here all day. And before I get to this last question, I did just want to take a step back and invite everyone to stay till at least our town hall in this afternoon. We have Professor Justin Hansford here from Howard Law School.
Stand up, Justin. I made my picture stand up. You guys stand up too.
So we're really excited to welcome him and his team from Howard Law. Professor Hansford is also an appointee to United Nations Permanent Forum on People of African Descent. And I had the opportunity to meet him when I traveled with Director Davis to Evanston in December for a reparations conference. And he was talking about his work, and I was like, oh, can San Francisco be one of the 20 cities that you visit to talk about the state of Blackness there and to give us our grade? And I might be paraphrasing, but he basically said, well, y'all ain't got no Black people there, so why would I come? And I was like, well, our decline is a part of the story, right? Because it didn't always look like this outside. So we're very honored and grateful that didn't deter him, that he's here and excited to talk with folks in community. But yeah, I wanted to end on a dream. So what are our opportunities and towards economic freedom and liberation in a city like San Francisco?
Oh, that's a light question. Well, one, I do feel like there is this erasure, right? And this unwillingness to really, especially when you have such a small population, to push them aside and say it's insignificant. So, really, we have to start with an effort to really say that we care and we will center Black people, and do it with care, with love. When I think about some of the work that we embarked on, and some of that is it's a little nerdy, it's about research, but it's not just about research for research's sake. It's very interesting when we've gone into communities to talk to Black people, and they've said, no one has ever come to really ask us what we want. And I'm not saying that people are not objects of knowledge, because they are. People swoop in, do a focus group, and then say, here are the results. But it's not done really with centering the whole person. I was at doing some work on race and wealth, and a researcher got up and I was talking about we are more than our struggle. I was talking about joy, and she said, as a major researcher at an Ivy League institution who studies Black people, said, I would like you, Anne, to stop over romanticizing joy.
Oh, please.
And I thought, these are the folks that are going in communities and collecting information, and that information is then used to develop policy, right? And so we have to first, and I really think it's so, we've talked about it all morning, we have to address the anti-Blackness in San Francisco first and foremost, right? In the communities, in the institutions that are held. And if that has to be something that has to be done with intention and strategy, right? Economic justice won't just come, and it shouldn't just be on the backs of people who already are struggling to make this heavy lift. We need folks that are in government to do better by Black people. And that means Black people in government too, who are current gatekeepers, right? It's an ugly truth, but it is a truth, right? Economic justice to me is not just about improving someone's income. It is really about that whole person, that whole body. And the fact that there is richness and assets in our community in ways that people don't value, right? To say to someone, to say that we don't have joy, right? Or to say that you're over romanticizing joy means that people are coming in to look at deficits. They're coming in to look at pathologies, right? They want to see those pathologies. They want to see that struggle, right? Then they want to go and talk about it. So all you see on a piece of paper is what's wrong with us, right? And so we are not going to get there unless we approach this so very differently, unless we actually utilize Black researchers and advocates and activists to actually be spokespersons, until we actually really lift people's voices and have them have a seat at the table, and not just do that for a performative measure, right? Not just say, hey, we're going to bring this one person from the community, what do you think, right? And then check it off the list. So there's a lot of things that need to happen that are so foundational and fundamental. But it can't start if we're unwilling to talk about Blackness, right? If we're unwilling to really see the wholeness and the richness and the history. We just talked about the history, the rich history of Black people in this city, and the shoulders that people are standing on. It is rich and it is deep, and people are still continuing in those traditions. They're still fighting the way that their grandmothers fought, right? And how do we honor that? How do we actually amplify that and have meaning to it? I see that Dr. Sy just left the room, but I did some work with her and others with public housing residents who were looking at a wealth framework and really thinking about wealth in such a broader way, right? Really thinking, like, one of the things that someone said is, how can we bring love to our community? And I remember someone saying, I can't fund love. What does that mean, right? Our definitions around what is wealth to us go beyond the mainstream. And oftentimes that doesn't get honored, right? That doesn't get incorporated. And so the way that we go about looking at problems is flawed. And the way that who we utilize to do that really decenters Blackness. I'll stop there.
No, I think that's beautiful. Thank you so much. I have a sweatshirt that says Black Joy is revolutionary, and you
Yes,
just
it
like gave it such deeper meaning, because I think that there's such policing that goes on around joy, or as Director Davis was referring to earlier, rest or leisure. It's like we're always expected to be producing something. And if not, then that is pathologized as, you know, the tropes around the welfare queen, who I just learned, I think in an article, was actually a white woman. Hello.
I'm not surprised.
I was a little shocked. I was
I'm
like,
not
oh,
surprised because, don't get me started. First of all, I want to thank Ann.
yes.
We're meeting for the first time, but we had a long-standing conversation some years ago when I tried to convince her to come to the East Coast, and she wouldn't. Very few people turned me down, Ann, but you did. But what you're doing now with intersectionality and joy is so very important. As I did a piece of this year's African American History and Heritage Month theme was Black resistance. And I wrote a piece saying that joy is resistance. Yeah, because people like to come up in our community, like you said, look at us being all pitiful, and they get their rocks off us being pitiful.
But it just affirms their bias because they come in looking for a deficit, as you said.
Exactly. But if you look, even in enslavement, there was joy.
Yeah.
People jumped the broom.
Yeah.
That was joyful. People, the more pain than joy if you had to see your children sold off. But to have those children, and in many cases, to have your boo. Not always, because basically, again, you don't get Black people who look like me unless there were a whole lot of rapists running around. But we know that happened as well. But even in the midst of that pain, there was joy. And that's what we have to, Alice Walker wrote something once called Reclaiming the Secret of Joy, one of her books. And it's all this stuff is kind of weird. But this look weird in terms of talking about joy. And I think that once we are able to think more joyfully, we can also work more collectively. See, because we basically were nurtured in a competitive, predatory capitalist society, which requires us all to look one up and one down. To count other people's money. Why do they get all that money and I don't have it? The better way to look at it is, why can't we do something? So I wanted to say something about Justin too. He and I serve on the National African American Reparations Commission, IBW21.org. If you want to look at the 10-point plan we have for reparations. And it's not just a check. Reparations is not just about a check. It's also about restoring our communities. One of the things that NARC has been doing is looking at places where we can, Brian Stevenson has done a lot with Who's Been Lynched, also what has happened in these places? How do we lift that back up? And in terms of doing that, we really have to think about and talk about the cultural tourism industry and how in San Francisco we could claim some of what we lost. When we talk about a Mary Ellen Pleasant, we talk about the treasurer, Lieserdorf. And he's a bad memory jammer now. The treasurer of the city, and there's so many others. When we go back and look
I
at.
heard that the Painted Ladies were all owned by Black people at one point.
Probably.
It makes perfect sense if you look at the neighborhood before redevelopment, right?
Exactly. And there
It's
is
just that erasure, right? And what that does
So
to
much
us and how we see ourselves, like you took all of this wealth and then there's no monument, there's no
Nothing.
naming of it.
Exactly, and that's part of what reparations is about. It's not just about the check, but it's also about the mindset. What happened to us as a people to make us hate, in some cases, ourselves, to force us to assimilate in ways. I'll tell y'all a funny story. I have lots of, but when I was president of Bennett, I hired this dude. Why did I do that? He actually was very good. He was a good organizer. He kept me straight. But dude was like, I had let him go after about 8 months. One day he came to the office and he said, "Do you own anything that is gray or navy?" And I said, "Probably, but not to wear." Red and orange are my favorite colors. And African attire is my favorite thing to put on my body. But my man, he worked for me. And he asked me, did I have any gray or navy? And I'm like, dude, what's the purpose of this question? And he said, well, you're going to have an opportunity to go to Wall Street and be on the stage with people who ring the bell. And you should really try to find something subdued to wear. Man, I found the loudest thing I had. It was like 11.22 million colors. And then I had the temerity to put a red sweater on top of that. And it showed up. I mean, it showed up. And of course, Vic Bernanke was my classmate, former Fed classmate at MIT. And we ran into each other maybe 20 years later. He said, "Oh, Melvo, I remember you. You were always so." And then he paused. Then he paused and he said, "Colorful." I said, "Did you mean colored?" No. Colorful. She colors on. But who taught us that colors are African? Who taught us that we had to play small? That we had to wear gray or navy or black? Now I do own those colors because I own all colors. I love clothes. But I mean, the whole notion that we should have to shrink ourselves. And so joy is being ourselves. That's what I love so much about Angel Reese. It's just her unabashed embrace of herself. Even in the face of all those words that people use. And she was ghetto. What's that? She was hood. What's that? Unladylike. The little white woman did the same thing. And they did a whole special on her on ESPN.
Called her the clapback queen.
Yeah. I mean, but
They're gonna use our language to uplift and then at the same time put us down. And what type of cognitive dissonance is that?
Absolutely. So when you ask about economic opportunities, and cultural tourism is one. There's so much richness in San Francisco. The possibility of doing collective work around wealth building is the other. I mean, we don't often do that. And because we have been trained not to trust each other. Right. But the possibilities of collective work, and it can happen in big places like in organizations like the NAACP, but it can also happen on your block with your friends. How can we begin to talk about taking something back? See, they keep talking about they want to go back to the good old days. I want to go back too. I want to go back to Africa. I want to go back to the good old days when and although I tell you another funny story, Mari, I remember the time I got an award from the National Council of Black Studies. I received it in Oakland. I took my mother. I have to be careful. You used to have to be careful about where I took my mother. Because she didn't always know how to act. Like if she were here right now, she would say, "Julianne, put the mic down. Other people have to talk." But she would say it while I'm talking. But at NCBS, this brother was romanticizing, if you will, Africa. He would say, "Oh, however," and mommy said, "So who stole my VCR?" All loud while the man was talking. And I'm like, "Brother, you can't do that." He's like, "How do you think you got to be who you are?" I'm like,
That part.
like that. But there are possibilities and opportunities. We are being erased in San Francisco, but we cannot be erased unless we allow ourselves to be erased. And so the challenge for us who are Black and San Franciscans or natives is to take it back. Y'all need to be at every Board of Supervisor meeting, every Board of Education meeting, there ought to be a Black person on every task force that this city has. And we should not allow ourselves to be erased. And we should, and I'm a little mean, it's not my fault. I was born that way. But I think that we should also express ourselves joyfully. Yes. That we don't always have to roll the eyes and roll the neck, but that I want people to look at us and envy us and say, they're having a good time. I went to Boston College undergrad. We were horrible.
Have to give you the mic later. You gotta get to the next. We'll go back to Boston.
No, all I'm gonna tell y'all about Boston is the Black folks at Boston College, we have fun. Now, we were a minority. One time, we were barbecuing right before the history fire. We were out on the lawn barbecuing, and the Jesuits said, I don't know how they have so much fun, but the Blacks have fun. And that's what I want people to see when they see us. The Blacks have fun. We're going to keep having fun.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking us.
Well, community, as you all heard, this has been a great conversation with Ann Price and Dr. Duro. Again, we're talking about equity. We're talking about the state of Black economics in the city. This has been a great conversation. I hope you guys heard some of the amazing feedback and just greatness that was coming out the mouth of the panelists today. And again, Black Joy, Dreaming Forward. That's what it's all about. Dreamkeeper Initiative. We are here uplifting the voice of the Black folks in this city. Great stuff. Taking a quick transition, and then we'll get back into the conversation. But it's been great. So I'm hoping y'all are listening and y'all getting this. And man, this is great. I'm learning a lot today. Phenomenal. I'm just happy to be here, and just happy that this event is taking place in our city today. Again, as we talk about equity, we talk about building wealth, these are the conversations that we have to continue to have. So thank you all.
Hey. Okay, cool. That way I don't have to record. You ready?
Yep.
African American Culture Center. No. I'm in the States. Oh, yeah. That's what I meant like a day before she came in. Yes. That's way back. That's what I meant. I'm a
Nice complicated system,
It's always good to be seen. Love you too. Love you. Dick and thin.
Yes, always. Love.
I was talking to Kevin Williams. She's doing a book or something like that. I do a lot of information. But her, as director, you guys as director, because it's a big money point. So that's something I'm trying to get on. They got your sister down there now, but is she doing good? I don't know what she doing, but she ain't from the community. Yeah, I was thinking about that. I was thinking about that job. Yeah. They want nonprofit company, something. Like, I have the experience to do that building, but I don't have the thing that they need. You don't think you have. You have experience in Hunter's Point and in the field. Like, I need to bring my full union down. Because, I thought about it. But that's a they always come up with something they know you like whatever. Okay, you can always get in and get the experience they're talking about. And we can call them on that board. Okay. Yeah. I mean, the sister, I met the sister, she's a nice sister, but she ain't from the community. Right, well, and if I wasn't the director of somebody that you wanted to yeah, you actually. I wasn't supposed to get ready. They didn't want to do it directly. They wanted to go through somebody from the community.
You do another one live now. Whatever y'all say is hot mic, okay? Don't talk about the mirror, nobody.
Yes, but no, it's just that. Yeah, but officer will. I can give you some.
Hey, how are you? Ready to take that raw meat.
Interview time.
Okay. All right, welcome back after a short break. This next panel is going to address Black erasure. And we know what that looks like. I had mentioned this morning that my first job here in San Francisco was for the Mayor's Summer Youth Program in 1977 under Mayor Moscone, and we were 14% of the population, and today we are under 6%. In the late 70s and early 80s, when James Baldwin was touring San Francisco, and this is well documented in a great PBS film, he asked what was going on when he went through the Fillmore and other areas. And he said, oh, that's urban renewal. And he famously said, looks like Negro removal to me. We have a very distinguished panel today, including Fania Davis, a civil rights trial attorney, author, public speaker, and PhD in Indigenous knowledge. She's a leading voice on the intersections of racial and restorative justice. Coming of age in Birmingham, Alabama, during the Civil Rights era, the murder of two friends in the 1963 church bombing led to a lifelong commitment to justice. One of those victims, Carol Robertson, is much beloved and missed by Jack and Jill of America, which she was in when she was a teenager. We also made sure that her murderer stayed in jail until he died in jail. Co-founder of Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth and National Association and Executive Director of Community and Restorative Justice. Her honors are frankly too long to list, but they include excellence, a Lifetime Achievement Award in Excellence for Restorative Justice, and being a member of the Ebony Power 100 Award. The Los Angeles Times has named her a new civil rights leader. African American Studies with a concentration in gender and sexuality, and a PhD in geography. Kirby's dissertation surveyed the practice of redlining in San Francisco from the 1950s until the 1980s. Kirby's research understands how urban, political, and economic determinants shape the lives of Black queer people. Kirby currently serves as the Director of Research for Cirrus Policy, research focusing on community investment, racial equity, analysis, and state-sponsored gender-based violence. We have our chair of the African American Reparations Advisory Committee, Eric McDonald, who speaks about the displacement of Black people and culture and intersections with reparations work in San Francisco. He's a principal in Peacock Partnerships, LLC. Many of us worked with him at United Way. He's a native son of San Francisco, a people first advocate, strategist, diversity trainer, executive coach, amazing keynote speaker, and his spirituality keeps us all grounded. He provides strategic management consulting support to leaders and organizations in the nonprofit, government, philanthropic, and private sectors. And he has his undergraduate degree in public administration from the University of San Francisco and is a certified life coach. And not last and not least, but we have Tanish Hollins. She's a survivor of crime, and she's a native of San Francisco. And she is a lifelong community organizer. She's the executive director of Californians for Safety and Justice, and her leadership helped to pass historic first-in-the-nation legislation that extended employment leave for all survivors of violence, as well as legislation permitting crime victims to terminate their leases if they no longer feel safe in their homes. Her advocacy has not only changed laws, but changed lives and saved lives. And with that, our eminent panelists, thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair Clapton. And thank you, Brittany, and thank you, Dr. Cheryl, and all of the organizers of this wonderful event. And thank the panelists. Can we give them another round? These panelists are the last panelists. Alafia. This is an African greeting, which translated means peace, good health, and all of life's blessings to you. In European Western traditions, the individual is of central importance. In African ancestral traditions, the collective is the most important, whether the family, the clan, the tribe, or other group. Collectivities are the spaces where we are nurtured, where we belong, where we are seen and heard, where we thrive. Ubuntu. I am because we are because I am because of my community. Without a community, my humanity is diminished. When Black people and Black culture are systematically removed, geographically erased, we lose our communities, our homes, our cultures. Children are lost, people are lost. Basic human needs go unmet. This diminishes our humanity, this diminishes life. May our children and our people have nurturing homes and communities where we will all thrive. So we're going to talk about the destruction of our communities, the extermination of our communities, the cultural genocide, the ethnic cleansing that is taking place here in San Francisco with some incredible panelists here today. You'll learn a lot. Cabals of real estate developers seeking to drive up profit margins and local governments seeking to generate greater revenues for the city through public policies of rezonings, tax abatement, and privatization of public spaces through redlining, urban renewal, and revitalization through private policies of racial covenants, all work to force Black people out of their homes and out of their communities, while welcoming in affluent white people. These policies result in human rights violations, and I'm glad that we have someone who is a representative to the UN, Brother Justin, here today. In 1970, it's been said that San Francisco was about 13%, if not 14% Black. I understand today it's really more like 5% Black. San Francisco was once the national beacon of African American culture, home to thriving jazz that had so many clubs that it was known as the Harlem of the West. Barbershops, retail outlets, bookstores, restaurants, dance halls, jazz clubs, and countless other Black cultural landmarks are gone. Forcing low-income families out of their homes and communities results and cascading human rights abuses, homelessness, loss of jobs and income, ill health, higher mortality rates, higher transportation costs because you're pushed to the edge of the city, decreased educational achievement, increased incarceration, worsening anxiety, and mental health issues, all working to compound the inequities that drive people into poverty in the first place. Black erasure in San Francisco and indeed throughout the nation is a fundamental human rights violation, if not ethnic cleansing, if not cultural genocide, as I just said. And very briefly, I want to talk about terminology. Well, first I want to say that I have heard, I think it was from Ron Daniel, that this is an emergency. Gentrification, displacement, Black erasure in cities throughout the nation. And it is something, however, that we have not responded to with urgency, with the urgency that it warrants. And why is that, I ask myself. And I think one of the reasons has to do with the fact that the terminology that we use sort of makes gentrification, urban renewal, revitalization. It sounds innocuous, if not something that's really good, right? We imagine cleaner neighborhoods, greener neighborhoods, more stores and pretty places. These are all positive images. And all of the negative stuff, the removal part, the erasure part, the human rights violations are hidden or concealed through that language. Our words can create and shape our realities, as was said earlier in the last panel. If we want to really begin to respond with the urgency that is warranted, it's important for us to start to change our language. And to close this part of my framing remarks, I think that it's our job to correct this and expose this mistaken thinking about Black displacement and Black cultural displacement. When we change the language, we change the perspectives. So our panelists will share their thoughts about Black displacement. And hopefully we'll also talk about what we can do about this, as you said earlier. We'll talk about the intersections with reparations, with crime, and the displacement of gay culture. And with that, I'm going to ask you, my sister, Kirby, to begin.
Let's give it up, y'all. Well, first I want to say good morning. Thank y'all for being here and dedicated to the movement for reparations. What a time to be alive. You know, Franz Fanon said every generation has a duty. You either fulfill it or you don't. So this is our generational duty, along with abolition of carceral systems that keep dehumanizing our people. All right. So we here, we active. I want to start off with a quote from one of my favorite freedom fighters, Mr. Joyner Truth. She said, "I am the shadow to support the substance." Show of hands, who's heard that before? Yes, I am the shadow to support the substance. That is what Mr. Joyner Truth said in her struggle for abolition. And she was referring to the erasure of Black people's contribution to the foundation of this country. She was speaking about the erasure of Black women and our contributions to the foundation of this country, and how at the time, white women, people who were fighting for women's rights, were trying to act as if the Black woman had did nothing for this country. So we've been battling with this conversation and battling against erasure for a very long time, up from slavery. Okay, so when we're thinking about San Francisco and Black people's contribution, I want y'all to remember the quote, "I am the shadow that supports the substance." All right? So the first thing about the politics of erasure, there's a reason for it. And the ultimate reason why you must erase a people is to alienate them, okay? Is to abject them, make them feel like trash, discarded, that they're waste. This is why we erase people. And this is why particularly we've been erasing Black people's contributions to the city since the redevelopment project, okay? I want to go into our good brother, Justin Herman. Show of hands, who knows who Justin Herman is? All right. So Justin Herman is the developer who was the mastermind around Black elimination from San Francisco, right? He is the comparison to Robert Moses in New York. Something that most people don't know about Justin Herman is that he actually invented the wrecking ball method, where when we're talking about redevelopment in San Francisco, we're talking about the demolition of 64 blocks in our central business district that actually erased the landscape of Blackness through a wrecking ball method, right? Something else about Justin Herman, he first redeveloped Honolulu, Hawaii. He made it a modern tourist utopia. And he was sought out by the city of San Francisco after, in 1943, the Board of Supervisors released their plan called the New City. And the New City was about getting rid of blight. But blight, remember, is synonymous with black. And so even when you see the New City, which you can find it on archive.org under San Francisco Redevelopment Archive, check it out, Google, right? You'll see imagery of Blackness and how green spaces are supposed to replace black, dark energy. We are synonymous with black, dark energy when they were coming up with the term of blight, right? So Justin Herman came from Honolulu to San Francisco, and what's really important about Honolulu in their redevelopment process, everything was about eliminating the native. Everything was about incarcerating Native Hawaiians and removing them from the city to make space for this new tourist destination of Honolulu. He did such a good job that San Francisco was like, you gotta come out here. You gotta replace these people. In 1971, Justin Herman, in a city planning meeting, he said, the land is too valuable to permit poor people to park on it. And they all agreed. Seconded, A's, and all of that, right? It's important us as students of history to go back to those meeting minutes to track these conversations. City and County of San Francisco supported these sentiments about removing impoverished people from this center. But you know, karma is a big, you know. How many of you all knew that Justin Herman died from a heart attack? He died from a heart attack in the middle of a city planning meeting, right? When members of the Western Addition Community Organization was making public comment. Just how remember y'all was making public comment on March 14th? Remember y'all was in there? One after one, I saw it, I was getting tired, I was like, damn, they still going. That is the exact same energy that caused Justin Herman to have a heart attack and fall out and die. That's the power of our ancestors. That's what I mean when I say I am the shadow to support the substance. So the politics of erasure, what I really want you to be mindful of is that, yes, Justin Herman, he got his, but we also want to think about the consequent actions in the contemporary. We have to think about the economic consequences of social isolation. What does it really mean for our people not to be a part of the imaginary of what San Francisco is? We have to think about the social consequences of pattern avoidance. I remember always working with students in San Francisco, they just don't go certain places. Self-segregation. So even though redlining doesn't exist anymore, there's still an imaginary redlining. You'll go on Yelp and people be like, oh yeah, don't go down there. You know what I'm talking about. And the relational isolation that Black people experience in this city is important. That Black is synonymous with ghetto, Black is synonymous with hood. And what that does is it erases our contribution to the foundations that we made the city. And so it's really important, again, just to remember the historical and forgotten spaces. And it's really all of our work to remember all of these details. The work of rememory is important. And that was really the work I did with my dissertation. So if you want to just look me up, I got a book out, check it out on Amazon. But I talk about all of this, right? But I want us to, for example, take the Black queer community in San Francisco as a micro example. There's many, many communities in San Francisco that have been fighting, talking about Black Muslims, talking about the disabled community, talking about all many different communities. But when we get to the Black queer community, I want you to just think of this as a perfect example of a community who was policed out of existence, right? I want you all to understand that we have speakers like James Baldwin coming to San Francisco. There was also another part of Take This Hammer, where he's talking about the erotic relationship between the cowboy and the Indian, right? Do we remember that part of Texas Hammer? So he also talks about the erotic relationship between the white man to see the black man in distress. So we have to think really deeper about queer spatialities. We have to think deeper about things such as Jonestown Massacre. Show of hands, how many people know a lot of that happened right here? All of our ancestors. I remember I was doing interviews for my dissertation with descendants, talking about, they told me, city and county of San Francisco is responsible for Jonestown, for the bodies in Guyana. And so this gets me back to the work of reparations, right? I support the Reparations Commission with research. We're doing geography, GIS, but I started to do these methods by even interrogating Jonestown, by interrogating all of the assets that people, Black people, gave to the People's Temple, land that was given to Jim Jones, that was eventually re-seized back by the city and county of San Francisco, and then resold to, for example, the gay community of San Francisco, who in 1978 created their own commercial district known as the Castro, the first in the city, right? Actual community improvement block, being able to get community development grants, right? So the economics of this, many communities have been invested in. When we're talking about Japantown, why did that community receive the funding, the support, but we couldn't? And so many other communities in the city, you know, are seen as more worthy. And that's on the backs of our ostracization. So when we're talking about reparations, we have to remember these moments in history and reclaim our space, reclaim our contributions, reclaim the fact that we won the war, World War II. How many of y'all in 1945, Hunters Point was the largest shipyard in the world? We won the war. So through us, we have to always question, how does capital enable us? Because we did have Black progress, we did have Black ownership. 3rd Street was full of Black ownership. That was a Black business corridor. And in our fight for reparations, what does it look like to make policy proposals for cultural preservation of that street, of improvements for that street, for the Bayview? So the fight for reparations is gonna take a very long time, but it first starts with your contribution of helping us remember Grandma's shop down there. The memory of, yeah, I actually was around for Western Addition Community Organization. I was at that meeting. We have to get these oral histories. We gotta plot these dots so we can understand the lost opportunity, right? That's a lot of the methodology we're doing with the commission, is to look at those parcels, right? Look at the land that was stolen from us and calculate the present day value. Because that's how much you owe us. Because we could have been sitting on millions, right? But we had arrested development. So those are a summary of my comments, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. I'm hoping we'll have some time for questions from the audience, so we're gonna try to move through this. Tanish.
First of all, let me say that class is in session because Professor Lynch just gave y'all a whole lot, and I hope you took notes, and I hope you do your research because it's critical, especially right now. And since you said so much, there are just a couple of things that are sitting in me that I want to speak to before I hand it over to Eric, because I know we only have a limited amount of time. One is, as a person who's from a place, right? The perspective shifts very different. Your perspective is very different than someone who's reading this information. So if you are Black and from San Francisco, raise your hand, okay? And that's important because the majority of spaces that we're in, you don't see that, right? So the impact that has on us psychologically is that we're constantly being gaslit about our experience, constantly being gaslit. You're not being erased. You hear Mac Dre when you walk down Mission Street. Not you that you couldn't go into this bar, right? But it is implied. It has been handed down through legislation. It has been handed down through weaponized complaints about our presence, right? It's a real thing that we experience. Our voice is being erased in advocacy conversations because we're constantly told that we're immature in the way that we are looking at the problem that we experience in our community when we say you did this for this community and not for our community. So I just want to lift up, especially to affirm us, right? Because we don't get that enough, right? We put a lot of pressure on ourselves as Black people to speak to our experience in a certain way that doesn't offend other people or make us feel like we're asking for too much. That's why this reparations conversation is so important right now. It is about naming the harm. It is as much for the city and county of San Francisco as it is for us. This happened to us. It continues to happen to us every single day. The erasure is not implied as intentional. It's written into law, literally written into law. It's written into budget. The consciousness of your government is what its budget priorities are. And it constantly reminds you year after year, you are not a priority, that you are not worthy, right? So I want to name these things because it's important for us to understand where we are right now, that we didn't imagine it, right? We had the stories, the oral history is important. The history is important, it's critical right now, but we're also making history right now by unpacking this conversation in real time. And calling out the inherent violence in all of these systems that support what we experience every single day. That erasure translates to when we experience harm in our community, you don't get to have an identity as a victim, legally, right? You don't cooperate with law enforcement, and even if you do, your victimization, your victim identity is stripped. There are legal and economic consequences, psychological consequences, societal consequences to all of these things. And when you talk about that shadow, right, we live in that shadow every single day, where all of the issues that are connected to our experience as Black people are weaponized against us. It's your fault. It's your choice. It's who you are. And we're challenging all of that right now through this conversation. We have the audacity to say, you did this, you owe us, and we're going to get it. So I want to say this, I know we're going to talk more about reparations, all that too. Like, that's why the $5 million recommendation was so audacious. People need to be able to say, you owe us an astronomical amount of money for the harm that you have committed against us and continue to commit against us.
Can I just say, I'd love to give you and the Reparations Task Force a round of applause.
And thank you to the other committee members who are here, a couple of them are in the audience. Please stand up. Reparations Advisory Committee, Member Brown, Member the erasure of Black people in San Francisco have been way before redevelopment. I'm a native San Franciscan who was educated in SFHRC public schools. I had no idea who Mary Ellen Pleasant was. I had no idea that this city was literally established by a man named William Leesdorf, who was a biracial Black man. That the literal economic foundation of San Francisco, its waterfront, its hotel systems, its school system was established by a biracial Black man. And the wows in the audience let me know that y'all didn't know that either. Right? Y'all didn't know it either. But can you imagine what that would have done to know that? And I think about my children, my daughter's here, my oldest daughter's here. I think about my children and their experience of coming home every day, talking about how their culture there's a caricature of their culture, people all around them, right? That are able to quote unquote act Black. Act Black. Jelly baby hairs now. And they don't think that's ghetto. When they do it, it is, right? So I mean, there is so much that is very, very intentionally then not share so much information and history that has not been shared with us intentionally, because they are tied directly to land and resources in the city. Our culture, Black culture, is Frisco culture. For those of y'all who ascribe to the culture, Black culture is San Francisco culture.
Period.
Everything that we identify with as San Franciscans has a foundation in Black culture. And so there is the economic reclaiming, there's a historical narrative reclaiming work that we're doing, there's a cultural reclaiming work that we're doing, that you don't get to separate one from the other. There is no San Francisco without Black people. And you can see it. This lots of cuss, Dr. Davis. You can see it in how sterile our city has become. How sterile it has become, and continues to be. And just the emotional labor that goes into, one, fighting to make sure that that is recognized, that we hold systems and community accountable for that, and that we create and make space. It's one of the reasons why myself and 6 other Native Black San Franciscans co-founded SF Black Wall Street. The intention behind that was to reclaim space for Black people, not just in Bayview, not just in Fillmore, the whole city. Right. Because there was at one point Black representation in every neighborhood in this city, not just in 2 neighborhoods, right? So when I think about my sister Mo McNeely, Afatasi the artist, Afrofuturism and reclaiming space in San Francisco, right? She literally created a whole dimension and individuals that identify as Afronauts that are going around all of these places in San Francisco planting a flag for Black space in Pacific Heights, in Russian Hill, in Golden Gate Park, right? In every neighborhood, because it is our city. So there's just so much that's important. There's so much that this conversation is opening doors for us in our collective healing. One last thing I will say, for Black people specifically, what erasure has done has contributed to this culture of exceptionalism, that only a few of us can be here, and only a few of us can be here in a certain type of way. And if we're gonna have these conversations, we have to acknowledge that. We have to acknowledge that there is, it's been implied that there are only certain types of Black people that can speak to the value of San Francisco. And I'm going to challenge that. Every Black voice, every Black experience, every Black suggestion or recommendation or thought is valid in this process of what we're trying to do. And I want to make sure that we continue to be inclusive of those voices.
Absolutely.
Just a couple of quick things. One, this Black Girl Magic is just that. And so I absolutely will be brief. One, against the backdrop of all that we've just heard, all of the efforts to erase, we still here. I want to be really, we're still here, still here, still here. And then secondly, as has already been stated, this has been the erasure of Black folks, that is, has been the agenda of white America since we stepped foot on this continent. So it's not a new move, it's not a new transaction, it's been the sustained agenda. And what's ironic, at least in my view, as a native San Franciscan, 2 things. One, there's been the efforts to erase. At the same time, there have been the efforts to culturally appropriate who we are and how we show up. Want you here, but we want your Black joy. We don't want you here, but we want your Black resilience. We don't want you here, but we want your Black food. We want your Black music. Right. So the contradiction, right, that is present all the time. Last 2 things. One, 2011, I had the privilege of chairing the redistricting process. 2010 census, Now it's time to redistribute population across the 11 supervisorial districts, and so we went about that process. The loudest voice from public in that process was real estate. Real estate showed up in the room. We had over 1,800 hours of listening to folks making proposals of how the lines should be redrawn. And again, the loudest voice was they. And it was real estate who said, let's call it Lower Pack Heights. It was real estate who said, let's call it NOPA. Right? It was real estate who said, what about an East Cut? Right? It was so over time, shifting narrative, all supporting this erasure of Black presence. And so again, it's been the agenda. And so fast forward, here we are in this moment of reparations. Let's be really clear, folks. The United States of America, the state of California, and San Francisco owe us more than they could ever afford. There's no number that's too big. And we need to own that. Right? And so the accountability is not for us to help them figure out. When I take you to court and sue you and the judge rules in my favor, the judge doesn't even say to me, can you help them figure out how they should pay? No, not my role. And so our opportunity to reclaim both the spaces the narrative ultimately decide to do is a political battle. And I would suggest we really clear that that's what it is. It's not a numbers game, it's a political battle. And so really want to both support and encourage you all to continue to stay in that game. Because if, and as we are going to win, and I believe we're going to continue to win, that it will require us to play that game so that we hold them accountable and we continue to remind them we're still here, we're going to remain here, and we're going to continue to take up space and place to celebrate the beauty and Black joy that we are. Thank you.
Church and for the school. Yes, indeed. Wow. Do you have any questions of one another or comments?
I do have a question. So Kirby always says I'm a fan. I'm a huge fan of Dr. Lynch, and if y'all are not, you need to follow her work. She's absolutely brilliant. But I'm curious about the fields that you've chosen to study, right? And I'll be completely honest. The research that you do is a game changer for the processes that we're in right now. And I don't know if that was your intention in stepping into your fields of research. So for you personally, just for you academically, why this route? Why this work?
Deep. Well, this my Capricorn says favorite Capricorn. We're kindred. Capricorns get it done. No, but to be honest, it was in my racist colonial indoctrination at University of California, Berkeley, where say that San Francisco wasn't a post-colonial geography, that Black people weren't a colonized subject in America, that the conditions in San Francisco, who cares? In my graduate program, you could have white people study gentrification in San Francisco and be like, cool. But when me as a Black woman studies it, it's like too close to home. I remember when I was first going into the archives of Jonestown and looking at all of the land that had been taken from those Black men. The city and county got that land and how much the value of that land and how they seized these assets and redistributed it back out. And I was like presenting this to my department and they were like, that sounds like a conspiracy theory. And I'm like, the the stolen wealth, our abjection, our lack of empathy for the destruction of that community was to be summed up as a conspiracy theory, really motivated me. And it was also at the time when Mayor London Breed became mayor and the first Black woman mayor of the city. And then I was like, that's God too. And they're saying, why you study San Francisco? Why Black people in San Francisco? Again, so it all led me here. And I also did my undergraduate research in South Africa too. And I was in Cape Town, yeah. And when I studied gay culture in Cape Town. And when I went to the gay clubs in Cape Town, they're like, you're from San Francisco? Oh my God, it's like the gay capital of the world. And I'm like, yeah, I guess. Castro's super dry, but but it was deep because out of my time in Cape Town, because you know that's still a settler colony, I was the only Black person in those clubs, and so that the indigenous African couldn't go into those spaces. For me as a Black American, I could. So it actually brought me home to study. Okay, so that's the gay capital of Africa, but what you need to know about the gay capital of the world is that it's rooted in anti-Blackness. And that anti-Blackness exports out to Cape Town, to Tel Aviv, and that many gay capitals throughout the world are anti-Black. I started to study again cultural appropriation, right? Talking about Sylvester. Show of hands, y'all know Sylvester? Yeah. His revolutionary song, You Make Me Feel Mighty Real, was actually a protest song because he was a part of an organization called the Cockettes, which was a group of white boys who again were buying up property throughout Western Addition. You know, because in the late 70s, San Francisco gave out cheap land, free VA loans, right? 0 down payment, gave out $30,000 rehabilitation money, 0% interest rate for many of these gay boys to do cooperative housing. And you had to be how they said you need to be, you need to do what they need to do. And Sylvester was like, I ain't getting down with that, I'm from Watts. And so he left that and he actually said, you know, I'm gonna be real, I'm gonna be real. And that's his protest song, and that's the beginning of disco. Disco, EDM, is a multi-million-dollar musical genre that many Black people don't benefit from. But the 120 beats per minute started here in San Francisco. So I just think how my studies led me here is the ancestral voice. And my ancestors being like, nah, we got so much more to claim. We've contributed so much more. And it's not a conspiracy theory what has happened to us.
We are the ancestors. Your ancestors love is absolutely. Can we maybe talk a little bit? I don't have my clock up here. So how much time do we have left? Okay. I'm hoping we can take a few questions from the audience. And right over there.
I guess I can project my voice right here in the theater. Can y'all hear me? Yes. Okay. So. That's a theater too, right? Yeah. So, is it on?
Yeah.
It got me talking all operatic. Is it on? To Dr. Kirby. You know, because during the redevelopment or urban renewal or the gentrification era in the Fillmore, you also had an urban renewal plan in the Bayview. It wasn't just the big five. It was, you know, it was also other collective effort. But have you studied that? You know, the Eloise Westbrook urban renewal plan, because I think, you know, that's very important too. I think the solutions or things that happened in the past that benefited us are very much important. So your work and your studies.
I want to just second that. I wanted us to talk about what do we do? What do people in this room do about what's going on to disrupt these strategies of liberation that have been dominating San Francisco?
Yeah, I'll speak briefly. So my focuses didn't lead me to specifically Bayview Hunters Point, but I did study Butcherstown redevelopment and how, again, many Black people were placed in the Bayview as the meat district and many Black people live next to that smell of the excess meat. And so Black people being strategically placed there because nobody else wanted to live next to the meatpacking district. So again, erasing why we're in particular spaces. But there's a great book called City of Transformation that talks about the power of the Big Five, and that many people don't know that community engagement, showing up to make public comment. I mean, to the point where homeboy had a heart attack. Really, that starts in San Francisco and the work of the Big Five, right? The San Francisco state strikes. Like, we have ethnic studies because of San Francisco, because of the Black people showing up and showing out. I've looked at civil rights photography in San Francisco, City Hall packed out by hundreds of Black people. And no other municipal area in California pulled out like San Francisco. And so a lot of the community engagement, what we know of it, like in the 21st century, started with the Big Five, started with our grandmothers and our mothers mobilizing people outside. So didn't study that particularly, but it's a part of the work for reparations and our claims right now.
Two things. One, Dr. Lynch, thank you for being obedient to what your ancestors called you to do. And the other is, as an organizer, and I'll tell you, you know, for a lot of us, we didn't have the intention or formal training to be community organizers. It's in our DNA. Yes. Right? And it wasn't until I traveled and went other places down south, DC, you know, got to go to museums, learn a little bit about the history of organizing and who led it and where it happened, that I started to see the power in it. I just knew that you couldn't talk to me about anything happening to my people or my family or my community and me not get in the conversation, because you can't tell me something about my own experience, right? And I think that's how a lot of us come into this, right? It's like, no. Let me tell you what's happening. Let me proposing things on us, right? That's how we become organizers. And it wasn't until over the last year or so that I really started to understand the weight and the power behind being identified as a community organizer. I've been in these spaces and doing this work now for over 2 decades as a young organizer, baby in the game, right? And I would sit in these panels where I had folks that had all these illustrious titles and letters behind their name, and I had none. And they would say, and she's a community organizer. And I would feel this small, right? And so I'm saying that because we as Black people have to assign more value to the role of me sitting here in a conversation with academics and researchers and movement leaders if the role of organizing wasn't important. And so we have to be more intentional about creating space to do that and seeing that as critical to what we're trying to do, because no change happens without organizing. No change happens without us being present and in front of it. And yes, it is political. A lot of y'all don't like politics. You want to do something else, fine. But you have to understand, being Black by default makes you political. Right? By default. You do not have a choice in that. Right? Because everything you want to do is going to require a political strategy. SF Black Wall Street started because we wanted to hang at the bar during the pandemic. And people were weaponizing 311 complaints against the only Black space that we had in the city at that time, right? So we had to get political because we wanted to drink and kick it. But do you understand the power of having that space and being in community, right? And drinking and kicking it, because that is where we conspire. That is where we plan. That is where we organize. That's how we organize, right? So don't lose, what I'm saying is don't lose the value in that, in these political conversations. Because yes, you do need to understand how systems work. Yes, you do need to understand how budgets move. Yes, you do need to have conversations and be informed about the people who are representing you, even the ones who look like you that don't always represent your interests. I said that because it's going to come up in this conversation as we fight for reparations. It already has, right? But what is the end game in this conversation, in this work that we're doing? If it is Black liberation, then it needs to be anchored in a lot of different places, in a lot of different ways. if the outcome of this, in addition to us getting 5 million apiece, I hope you do get 5 million, because I've got plans for mine. And they do include rims on my vehicle. Don't talk to me about what I'm gonna do with my money. But you understand, right? That even in that, that we need to have the audacity, right? We need to have the audacity to be thinking that way. All these things are important, right? But the most critical and foundational piece of this is that we have to believe we can. We have to believe that we can. You know, we have been triggered and traumatized. Has the government ever done anything in our best interest? When have they ever acknowledged, right? Even when we demanded it. Oh yeah, we heard you. This is what we can do about it, right? And then they're going to negotiate what they and how they can do about it. But it's on us, right? So I just want to uplift the power and value of organizing. Do your research on it. And this is not restricted to young people, because we always put it on young people. The future is y'all. Y'all doing amazing things. Y'all old people, get off your asses and read these books. You got information at your disposal right now, right? The entire world of information at your disposal. So, and we need all of the minds. We need all of the thinking, right, to help create these strategies. We need that investment. Because the biggest threat to this is a hope deficit. The biggest threat to anything we are doing to advance Black liberation is a hope deficit. And if you learn anything from this conversation about erasure, is that is intentional and by design to remove our hope, because our hope fuels everything.
Just really quickly, yes, 100%. In terms of how we get in this game, there is room in the revolution. There is room in the revolution for every single one of us. We need the advocates. We need the community organizers. And, right, so we need Fannie Lou Hamer, right? And we need Judge Marshall, right? So we need everyone. I remember being chastised because I chose to learn to talk white. I chose to learn to go into white institutions. I chose with intention. That was the place I knew I could bring value, that I knew I could orchestrate change. And so there's room in the revolution, folks. Find your space wherever that straight passion leads you and get in the game, because we need the organizing that pushes from outside, and we need the operatives that function inside to help bring policy, to help push budget, to help change practices. All of it is needed to make this work happen. And it's founded on, yes, our hope that this can be our truth.
That's a fundamental truth. Absolutely. Fundamental truth. And I want us to kind of go back to the fact that, you know, the population of Black people is constantly declining every year. So what do we do to stem the outflow? What do we do to stop the hemorrhaging of Black people and Black culture? Everything that has been said is so important. You know, reparations, the 5 million, and the ideas that you had about creating memorials in communities and reclaiming spaces, reclaiming our victories. And the practical question that I want to pose, and it's an and, it's not a but. What do we do now, tomorrow, to stem that flow? Because if we don't, it's not going to be all that. That last man in San Francisco, you know, the prophecy will come to life.
I would offer that a part of it is not the answer, but a part of the equation is we continue to evolve and shape our own narrative, right? That we own the narrative that we belong here. We own the narrative that we own certain spaces and we should be owning more spaces, right? And that we shift the way, literally, that we talk about Black San Francisco, right? One of the things that I want to do on a very singular individual basis, I'm regularly recruiting folks to come by and Bayview. Black folks, right here, come here. We got land, we got space, there's property, come. Because it's a place to be. And that's just me and Baby. But I really do believe there's a part of the narrative that as it continues to evolve, it creates a space, both of belonging and welcoming and attraction.
I love that. It's kind of like instead of taking a deficit approach and focusing on the problems and pro-Black folk, and we are talking about what is good and what you want and what will bring you, what will lure you here. Yeah, and the kind of work that you're doing.
Just adding something real, how we can all get involved. Knowledge is power. We have a great San Francisco Public Library. We need you to go in it and unearth our stories. I forgot one thing for your question. Hunters Point Rebellion, 1966, and the damages from that 5-day rebellion. National Guard shooting up all of 3rd Street, and the city of San Francisco refusing to fix it for years and years to come. The zebra murders. Who's familiar with that? That was the first stop and frisk program in this whole country. Forget New York. So knowledge is power, and when you go into the history of our people, you gonna fight. You gonna get that ancestral calling to speak up and respond. So that's what I think we can tangibly do. I don't know if that's gonna bring more Black people, but it's gonna bring us into consciousness that some of these people ain't our friends, and we are due our reparations.
And I think another thing that's really important is to deconstruct the whole notion of urbanization and revitalization and urban renewal. I think people think that to do this and to make communities safer and cleaner and greener and all that, it's unfortunate, but Black people have to go. Because that's just the way it is. It's almost as if it's inevitable. It is inevitable in a society that's based on systemic racism. It is inevitable in a society where its development is systemically racist. So I think kind of changing the narrative around that is really, really important. Yeah.
Yes. Narrative, and I like to speak to this. We also have to understand where we've adopted the narrative that's been imposed on our communities, right? So when I think about Eric and my sister Elaine out in the audience who reached out to me like, girl, it's the house for sale, and baby, you can come buy this house. And I was doing a bunch of different things, and don't give up on me because I am gonna buy that house one day. But my community also has a direct connection to my trauma. And that is true for a lot of us, right? Or trauma that we're familiar with. So when we think about safety or we think about where we want to invest, while this may not be ideal because it's 90 minutes away and I don't got no neighbors that look like me, I will make this investment because I will be safer. Black people, we create safety. We create safety for each other, right? We create safety because we create processes by which we're able to support each other. We create our own economy. We're self-sustained. I used to stay in Double Rock. Y'all, what y'all call it now? Oh, we call it Double Rock. And other people call it what? Alice River. So I used to stay in the Deuce. Now the thing about being in the Rock, right, is the Rock was a self-sustaining community. I didn't have to leave Double Rock. I get my hair done. I get my car fixed. I could walk 3 doors down to the candy house. I get some milk. I had neighbors. I had conversations with my people, right? And everybody who lived in Double Rock, it was diverse. It was a very diverse population of Black people and people of color. I had people who worked for the city and county in San Francisco. I had people who were at home raising their babies. I had elders, right? And so I think that we also have to undo this social conditioning of belief that wherever there are more of us, we're less safe, right? And get away from this idea that if we're going to invest, we need to take our investments to another place that is safer. Because when you're in those environments, you will learn just how unsafe they are for you. How unsafe they are for you physically, emotionally, spiritually, and financially. Because your dollar does not circulate back into your network of your people. right? And I have this conversation with a lot of us who have been displaced. We can't live in San Francisco anymore, maybe commuting, right? Now you're commuting to the city for your job. And this is still an anchor. This is still home for us, but it's only home when we've all commuted from all the different places that we've been. That's why we don't like being at home. I'm only there on the weekends. I did that for 6 years. So I'm speaking to that experience because the radical mind shift and the radical narrative shift has to also begin with us. It has to begin with the belief that when we create community with each other, that we increase safety, right? Because you know, when you get up outside, you open your garage or you go out on the stairs on your porch, you know everything that's happening in your community about what you see happening on the street. You know who got into it with their partner, you know who baby daddy and baby mama was funking, you know the kids, you know who had a bad day at school, you know all this, right? And that's what's missing. We're in environments now where we don't have connection, we don't have relationship, and we are not safe. And that even happens to us here in the city. Here in the city, if you're Black and you're an owner, unless you are generational, you most likely maybe still live in your neighborhood, but you live around a bunch of people that you did not come up with. So this idea around safety, this conversation around safety is one that we need to continue unpacking and we have to begin with each other. That's why Cafe Envy is the beacon for us. In a point, right? All the Black people, come here, it's grandma's house. Everybody, your auntie, your uncle, your ex, everybody's coming here, right? But that's intentional, your ex too. I seen them, girl. But it's intentional. It is intentional. It is intentional because that's how we create safety.
So, and I see the question from the audience. I just want to ask one quick question of the panelists. But what does love have to do with all of this? What does healing have to do with it? When you talk about creating a beacon that will affect it. Oh, okay.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Oscar James. I'm a native resident of Bayview Hunters Point for the last 77 years. My grandmother was the first person of color to buy a home in Bayview Hunters Point. But what I want us to really speak on is the economic part, where people say we're not worthy of getting that $5 million. As a young kid, there was a produce market down in Embarcadero that I used to go. I used to work at the farmer's market. I used to go pick watermelons and what have you, drop fruit off at the Chinese market over in Oakland. Also the produce market that was on Embarcadero under the freeway. As a 11, 12-year-old kid working in the farmer's market, I used to work with a guy named Red who owned the produce market. And he would stop at these different markets and drop melons off and what have you. Anyway, they told the Italians that was in the Embarcadero produce market that they would have to move. And they wanted to move them out to Bayview Hunters Point. And at that time, back in the 60s, the late 50s, 60s, nobody wanted to come to Hunters Point. We were bad. That was the worst place to go. So anyway, they argued and what have you. And the city came out and told them if they move on Gerald Street in Tolan, right next to under the 280 freeway, they can be there for 50 years, rent free. Rent free. Now I just passed by yesterday. I took a video of the produce market. I've been knowing about the produce market for how long. Most people don't even know that those people got that rent for 50 years free, including the Bank of America. Wow. Now, as soon as that 50 years left, they left. And as I was passing yesterday, looking at the produce market, and you guys go by there, I really want you to go by there and see what I'm talking about. They have, where the produce stands are, Then they have office space upstairs. And it goes back as far as you can go back. If anybody remember going to the produce market there, and all of the business that was there, all of the money. Now, 50 years, they made over $5 million for each one of those vendors over there. So we're asking for nickels and dimes, and they always ask us, well, the black fee. Okay, we worked harder than any race in this nation. We worked free for over 400 years. We worked here in the city and county of San Francisco. My aunt came here in the 20s. I mean, I was a little boy, and she was old. But she came here as a master teacher from Southern University and was denied to teach in the city and county of San Francisco, had to go to Oakland. All your professional black people had to go to Oakland if they had degrees. If you stayed in San Francisco, you had to go back to school, regardless of what kind of degree you had. Or if you have a PhD, you still had to go back to school here to be allowed to do any kind of work in the city and county of San Francisco. So, you know, people talk about the history. I know the history of San Francisco. I know the history of Baby Hospital. I got with redevelopment with Justin Herman. Okay, and a lot of you guys start talking, and I really want to give a due to Bree and Dr. Davis and Simone Walton for them putting this thing together for us, for this preparation. And when people start talking about peoples in the different areas, I set up under Miss Helen Mary Rogers and Essie Collins in Western Addition. Okay, I set up under Miss Westbrook. I got in my mother-in-law, Miss Ware. I got into community politics at 19 years old and still as a vanguard in clubs with our rags on our heads. Surrounded the building with Joseph Aliotto and Justin Herman at 201 South Ridge Road with all the Egyptian vanguards and sheiks. Surrounded the building and got those certificates of preference. Okay, and the $4,500 that we received up there. So it's people's in our community, and you have to say the people's names, the mothers' names, who were the fighters in our community. The brothers were working. I remember when they first came with the welfare system in San Francisco, in Bayview Hunters Point, where they denied the men to be in the house with the families. When all of 3rd Street, the top of 3rd Street, all the way down to the drawbridge was African Americans. Okay, you talk about Butchertown, you talk about where the train spur is now, where Mission Bay is, where the black folks, men's had to stay down there and in boxcars, burning wood. Now they done built everything, and they had taken that whole area away from our community. Potrero Hill, Hunters Point, Dog Patch, all that was South Park, all that was African Americans. Okay, look what's down there now. Okay, and it's economically strong, and we get no benefits from it.
Mr. James, thank you so much. No, we want to hear more of you in the town hall, which is coming next.
I just found out that the meetings is on the 2nd and the 4th Thursday at the Human Rights. I will be there.
And right here now, like the next thing will happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We so appreciate the wisdom of the elders and the historical knowledge. The knowledge is what is also under attack for erasure. And there was one comment that that shows the string of erasure. What does that look like from 1619? Forbidding language, forbidding customs, erasing the language, the customs, the differences. Because in Africa, there are no black people. That's a made-up concept, right? So when we got here, in order to have our foodways, learn agronomy from us, have all of our knowledge, because it wasn't about brute labor or brute strength, it was about knowledge, information. Midwifery was mentioned earlier, health. The witch trials was about Black women too, right? Because we came with the knowledge of midwifery, the foodways in the hair, in the beads, and bringing the seeds over planting the foods. So our history is deep in American history, but it was erased right from the beginning. Not being able to learn to read and write in English, which was supposed to be the unifying language, right? But it was still an opportunity for us to be communicating with each other. So yes, it's a big deal that we got PhDs and JDs and this thing and that thing and undergraduate educations, and all of that is important because our children have certainly heard from many of us, they can't take that away. We cannot be erased when we have knowledge. Thank you so much, all four panelists. We so appreciate you and your knowledge, the community activism and organizing, and the continued research and bringing it forth that we won't stand for continued erasure. We're going to continue the conversation this afternoon after lunch. Please come back because the town hall is going to be very exciting. Lunch is going to be in the Correct Center upstairs. But just before we go, I want to whet your appetites with Professor Justin Hansford, who's a professor of law at Howard University School of Law, HU, and executive director of the Thurgood Marshall Civil Rights Center. Professor Hansford was previously a Democracy Project Fellow at Harvard, and he's an expert on reparations legal frameworks, and he was recently, as was mentioned earlier, appointed to the United Nations Forum on People of African Descent. Please welcome Professor Hansford.
All right, so I know I'm standing between everyone and lunch, so I'm going to be very brief. Just wanted to encourage everybody to come to our town hall this afternoon, especially our elders, because we need to hear these stories and we need to be able to document our history so that we can make the case for reparations and change in a way that is going to be heard from the highest levels of government all the way to City Hall. Myself, I'm a member of the United Nations Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. What that means is they've created a platform for there to be a discussion around what it is we need to do to help Black people all around the world. 10 of us were elected from different parts of the world. We have the Caribbean, the continent, and Europe represented. I'm the representative from the United States and also Canada. So thank you. Also, a student here, Kawan Rowland, is a law student from Howard University. Together, we're So what we're doing essentially is as part of our win, we are creating the Black Audit Project. So what that is a campaign where we are going all around the country and we are going to different cities and measuring the extent to which these cities are recognizing our basic human rights on 17 metrics. These metrics include housing, education, gender justice, access to clean water. All of these metrics are contained in something called the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And all of the countries of the UN signed on to reach these goals by the year 2030. Right now, we see different countries and even different states measuring their progress on these goals. But too often, especially here in the United States, we never see how Black people are being able to reach or not reach these goals on access to basic human fundamental rights. So we are going to different cities around the country and we are giving these cities grades. And we are going to be grading the city of San Francisco on how well Black people are being able to be provided access to these basic human rights. And we're going to have a scientific measurement. It's going to be data driven. And we're also going to be issuing a report talking about the causes of any inequities that we find and of course, looking towards solutions. The same way that we saw your wonderful report from the San Francisco Reparations Commission started talking about reparations as a possible solution. So we've done the state of Black Pittsburgh already. We're going to be doing Chicago, Louisville, Dayton, New Orleans, but San Francisco is the first one for the year, and Kawan is going to be helping to run that project. So, so please stay so we can talk to you. If you have stories or questions for Kawan, he'll be able to follow up with you. And we're going to be opening the floor this afternoon to share their story, especially those who work in community organizations that are particularly close to this work, so that we can document what it is we need to do in our fight for racial justice in San Francisco. So please stay and please talk to Kawan if you want to have a contribution and you can't stay. We can provide our contact information so that we can follow up with you after the event. So thank you all, and see you at lunch.
Thank you all again, and we'll be serving lunch upstairs in the Quet Theater. So you can just go through these doors and head up the stairs or take the elevator, and lunch will be up there. Thank you.
All right, there you have it, community. We're going to go ahead and take a lunch break. We'll come back with a part 2 of today, about an hour or so. So tune in. There's been some great conversations about reparations, some of the social and economic impact that's taking place. So make sure you definitely tune back in. We'll be coming back live streaming after this break.